Welcome to Liberate Your People Pleaser. I am your host, Brenda Florida, certified life coach, and you might be a people pleaser if you sacrifice your needs or your wants or your feelings to benefit someone else, or you keep silent when something bothers you or upsets you, or you're super critical and feel like you're probably your own worst enemy. Well, here's what I've got in store for you for this podcast. First of all, there's nothing wrong with you and you don't need fixing. What we need to do is leverage the superpowers of being a people pleaser, because there are definite superpowers. You are super intuitive, I am sure. You have great powers of empathy, the ability to read a situation and know what's going on with people and those around you. So what we're going to do in each episode is talk about ways to disempower the parts of it that are diminishing and don't serve us anymore, and level up or empower all those superpowers. So join me in the next episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. Hello, everyone. In today's episode, we're going to talk about setting boundaries. Now, this can frankly be the hardest thing for a people pleaser. I know it was for me. It took me well into my 30s, and I had been in therapy for several years before I really started to even understand this, because depending on the sort of spectrum you're in of how imprinted into you, how habituated into you people-pleasing practices are, having a boundary might be a very unnatural thing. I grew up in a home with almost no boundaries. Like, we didn't even have bathroom boundaries. My mother could walk in on us while we were in the bathroom, and that was just okay. So that was very normal to me, right? We all grow up thinking whatever's happening in our home is normal. And so there are many of us who had no example of boundaries. And so we didn't even understand boundaries. I know I've coached people or taught, I've done a lot of leadership training in my career as well. And a lot of times boundaries come up, when I'm doing leadership development programs, and some of the people are at least honest enough and vulnerable enough to admit they don't even know what a boundary really is or how they would go about setting one. So this episode is for everyone. This is for if you're at that end of the extreme where you really don't even kind of understand what a boundary is, what its purpose is. And for those of you who do and may just need a few tips on how to be more clear about it, because the thing with a boundary is, of course, it includes another person, right? Now, we can absolutely have boundaries with ourselves, and that's important as well. Those are like self-care boundaries and things like that. But most of the examples I'm going to give today, most of the ways we'll talk about it will be in regards to other people. And so when it involves another person, you can't control whether or not they're going to respect your boundary or understand your boundary or respond to you in a way that, makes to them, because to them the boundary feels like it's selfishness on your part. So we can't control how the other person reacts to us. We can only control what we do. So let's dive into this. So first of all, for people pleasers, for the most part, we've been taught not to have boundaries, because if we had set those boundaries, then the enmeshed or over-functioning relationships we were in would not have worked, right? The whole reason we are people pleasers is because there are people around us who want us over-functioning for them, over-feeling for them, taking responsibility for them. And I'm not saying this to blame them or something, this is like what came first, the chicken or the egg. This is why so many times you may know people like this, or certainly if you've read books around addiction and recovering from addiction, so often you have a person who, let's say, is an alcoholic, and their spouse is covering up for them when, calling in sick for them. That's what I mean by covering up, just calling in sick instead of saying, they're drunk, or, of course, not even being willing to call their office or business to say they can't come into work because they're drunk. I mean, all those kinds of things are people-pleasing activities where we're trying to really protect this addict from the normal consequences of their behavior. And there's all sorts of rationalizations for why we would do that, all these things. That's a whole nother episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. But they like that we're doing that, right? That alcoholic likes that they're married to someone who will call in sick for them, who will clean up their puke when they puke on the floor, who will make excuses for the kids, or, whatever the behaviors are. And so but when you're that spouse, when you're the people pleaser, there's this thought that, everything would be fine if my partner would just stop drinking, or, whatever the addiction is. And then the person stops drinking and the marriage still falls apart and they get divorced, because we're as addicted, so to speak, to behaving like a people pleaser, that when the person on the other side isn't behaving the same, we get lost in what we're doing, because it just creates this upheaval. So you've really been conditioned. I just say this so that you understand. You've been conditioned by your environment to be the people pleaser you are, okay? And so nothing about my style of coaching is about blame. Everything is about personal responsibility. And some of that is just understanding the environmental impact of why we are how we are. So you've really been taught, you've been encouraged to behave this way. So if you begin to liberate yourself from it, and there's no liberation without boundaries, then some people will not like that. A lot of people will love it and it'll be like, yay, I'm so glad you're finally, standing up for yourself, or speaking your truth, or saying no, or whatever the case may be. Others will not be so happy. I call that the change back attack, which I take gratefully from my coaching mentor and teacher, Martha Beck. So the change back attack is what happens when you say, no, I'm not going to call in sick for you. No, I'm not going to clean up that puke. No, I'm not going to overfunction for you. No, I'm not going to, do more while you lay on the couch, or whatever it is. And that person gets mad at you. When in my first marriage, which was very codependent, I was very much the people pleaser, and he wasn't addicted to any kind of substance or something. I would just say he was addicted to being the way he was. And that was that I was supposed to do, the kinds of things he wanted me to do, and which involved a lot of over functioning. So, I'm taking care of all the household things, all the kids' things. We have 4 children, all within 7 years. So it's a lot of kids in a little bit of time, a lot of household things going on there. All the cooking, all the laundry, and then I got a part-time job. And the rationale was, well, he's working outside the home and I'm not. So I'm supposed to do all the things. And then I started needing to work outside the home because he wasn't making enough money. And so I still did all the things at home, and when I would complain because he wasn't helping me, he would get really mad at me. Well, for most of us as people pleasers, if somebody's mad at us, that will shut us down right away and make us want to just go back to keeping the peace, keeping the harmony, and not making waves, right? Those are the big things with people pleasers. Don't upset anybody, don't make waves, So that's a change back attack. As soon as I said no, like perfect example, we went to church all the time when my kids were little. And so here I have these 4 little kids under 7, right? So let's say they're 1 to 8 years old. And I'm getting everybody dressed up and ready for Sunday school in the morning, because we did it all, not just church. We had to go to Sunday school and church and Sunday night church and Wednesday night church and all the church. And so I'm trying to get these 4 kids ready while he's either sleeping, sometimes sitting in a chair in the living room reading his Bible, because how can I get mad at a husband reading his Bible, right? Or out in the car honking the horn if I'm late and I don't have all these children, not helping me at all with anything. And if I would complain or, ask for help, he would get mad at me, because for me, the fastest way to shut me down and get me to just do whatever you wanted me to do, was to be mad at me because I couldn't stand that. So that's a change back attack. All right. So I want to break this down further in one other dynamic that's super important about setting boundaries. And we're going to do a couple different podcast episodes on this, probably not all in a row, but over the next month or 6 weeks, you'll see, several episodes around boundaries because it's a big topic. We can't cover it in, one episode. But part of the dynamic of people pleasing and boundaries that you have to kind of get anchored in your head. This is a principle that I learned again in my coach training from Byron Katie, who is an author and really an enlightened being, in my opinion. She wouldn't call herself that, I'm sure, but that's what she is to me. And she's written a number of great books. Byron Katie, BYRON, KATIE. I'll put a link in the show notes to her website or something. She does a process she calls the work. And one of her concepts that she teaches is that there are 3 kinds of business in the world, okay? There's God's business, there's my business, and there's your business. So your, in this case, being anybody who's not me, okay? Anybody who's not you. And my business is only me. It's what's happening in my body. It's what I'm saying. It's what I'm feeling. It's what I'm thinking. It's, total responsibility here for all of me. But I'm not responsible for you. I'm not responsible for my children, certainly not as adults. I'm not responsible for my spouse. I'm not responsible for my BFF. I'm not responsible for anybody but me. I'm not responsible that there was a car accident. I'm not responsible that there was a hurricane. Those are God's things, right? We'll leave the natural disasters and whatever to God. But when you think about that, that starts to liberate you. If you can really get into that dynamic, that means when my husband's mad at me because I asked for help with the kids, I've not done something wrong. You see, and so I always interpreted it, if somebody's mad at me, not the least of which would be my husband, but it was more than that, friends, somebody I worked with, whatever, was mad at me, unhappy with me, displeased with me, any of those words, then I must have done something wrong because my job is to please everyone, right? I'm sure a whole bunch of you could relate to this. I would love to hear about it in the comments. And so I didn't want to do something wrong, So this concept of, oh, wait a minute, it's not my business that makes my ex-husband mad, did when we were married, and I asked him for help. It was my business to take care of myself, to say, hey, dude, I've got my hands full and I need some help. Or I don't like it when you treat me this way, right? I don't need you sitting out in the car honking the horn because we're late. I need you in the house helping me get the kids ready so we can get them in the car and get to church faster, right? But I wouldn't say any of those things at that time. It was just too much. It felt like too much for me. And I was so embedded in the belief that I had to please everybody, that's what being good was, that was part of my identity, even as, the good Christian wife I was trying to be, was that I was not supposed to upset anybody or disappoint anyone. Well, those are ridiculous standards set by somebody who isn't me. And it's completely unrealistic, and it's intended to shut us down, right? Because when we're really in a healthy relationship with somebody, they want to know, right? Like, I want to be married to somebody who wants to know when I need help, who wants to know when I'm overwhelmed, who wants to know if they've done something that's upset me. Not somebody who just wants me to be like, yes, ma'am, and whatever you need. And, I'll be over here not having any needs. So I hope that helps set the stage for what the many things that start to go into setting boundaries, because you can't start a new habit, so to speak. And that's what setting boundaries are. It's a new habit to have, okay? But this is a new habit that's hard to start because you've not been taught how to do it, because most people are not taught how to do it, period. There's not a class in school about boundary setting. Many of us are taught directly, especially women, not to have boundaries. Don't say no. Don't even, we could do a whole podcast on sexual boundaries, right? Is it okay for a woman to dress sexy, but what if the guy gets turned on and somehow it's her fault when he makes a pass at her and she doesn't want him to? Or the way dress codes are for girls in the schools, so much of it is set up so, they're not a distraction to the boys. Well, that's making these girls responsible for how the boys behave. That's not their business. That's the boys' business. That's the guys. In my case, it would be a guy because I'm heterosexual. It doesn't matter. This is not a gender issue. It is, if one person's dressing sexy and another person's turned on by it, that doesn't give the person turned on explicit permission to touch or advance or say something or do something to the other person, right? Those are like super distorted perspectives that have been perpetuated by patriarchy, frankly, and a lot of religious teachings, all kinds of different things. And so it's almost counterculture to have boundaries. And for some of you, as it was in my home and the home I created with my husband, it was counterculture to our internal, culture to have boundaries. So if it seems like a daunting task to you to start to set boundaries, don't be dismayed by that. One of the things I'm going to be doing, and I'll put a link in the show notes, is creating a coaching package specifically for boundaries, to teach people how to set boundaries in a very specific way. Like, I'm going to do this package as a one-on-one package, because your boundary you need to set with your person has some very specific components to it or dynamics in it because of your relationship that are going to be a little bit different than somebody else's. So while a group program on setting boundaries could be super helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure, having one that you can work out with me your very specific thing, like setting a boundary with your mother, or setting a boundary with your husband, or setting a boundary with a coworker or your boss or something like that. Like, we need to dive in and pick apart, how exactly to do that, and then help you find the language that fits your style and your personality. So the way I would say it, the way I would set a boundary might not be exactly the same as what you would say. So when we work one-on-one, I can help you find those words so that you can set that boundary. And whether there's a change back attack or not, you will learn to be able to stand firm in your truth of what you need. So that's our entry point into boundaries today. So I hope this was helpful. Just remember, as a people pleaser, don't be surprised if it doesn't come naturally to you. You were probably taught not to do it. We've got this dynamic of God's business, my business, their business, that will really help keep you grounded in, okay, so what do I need? What does my body want? What does my mind, my heart, my soul need in this situation? That's how you start to find the boundary. And just knowing that we can't have liberation without boundaries. Freedom is not a state of being that has no boundaries. Freedom is a state where we have boundaries, and those boundaries are respected. And so we have that freedom to really be vulnerable and express ourselves, because we don't have to be concerned about somebody shaming us or, lashing back at us in some way. And then there's always, dealing specifically with the change back attacks. And again, we'll talk about all these things some more in some future episodes, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage there for the foundation of some of these components that are necessary as we move forward in our liberation and learn how to really set these boundaries. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I would love to hear in the questions or comments what part might challenge you. Maybe you don't agree with me on some of it. That's fine. You can always disagree with me. I love to have those conversations. And feel free to reach out to me privately. Brenda@brendaflorida.com will always get to me. And, we'll see what your specific situation is about and how I might be able to help you, or give you some tips to help you through whatever bump in the road you're in when setting a boundary. So I love you guys. Thank you for being with me on this episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. All right. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. Hey, I've got 3 more things for you. One is join my private Facebook group, Liberate Your People Pleaser. We have lots of great conversations. I do Facebook Lives in there, drop in free resources, all kinds of cool things to support you in your journey to liberate your people pleasers. So the link for that is in the show notes. Second, I would love it if you would put a 5-star review on whatever podcast service that you found the podcast on. That would be totally awesome. And I'll give you a shout out on a future episode. And last but not least, if you've got a question you would like for me to answer or address, you'll also find a link in the show notes to do that. So submit your question and you'll hear me talk about it on a future episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. I'll see you in the next episode, everyone. Bye-bye.